My beloved child, there are moments in life that seem ordinary on the surface, yet they carry emotions so deep that they quietly change everything. Last night was one of those moments. While the world was asleep and the streets were growing silent, someone who has been carrying thoughts about you found themselves sitting alone, surrounded by nothing but darkness, memories, and feelings they could no longer ignore. The night air felt different to them. The familiar roads they had driven countless times suddenly seemed unfamiliar. Their destination no longer mattered. The music that normally filled the silence could not distract them. Their mind kept returning to one person. You. For a long time, they tried to push these thoughts away. They convinced themselves they were being too emotional. They told themselves tomorrow would be different. They promised themselves they would stop thinking about what could have been, what should have been, and what they truly felt. Yet last night, something inside them shifted. As they sat there alone, they began replaying moments that others might consider small. A conversation. A smile. A memory that seemed insignificant at the time. But in their heart, those moments had become treasures. The more they remembered, the harder it became to hide the truth from themselves. What surprised them most was not how often they thought about you. It was how deeply those thoughts affected them. You see, some people enter our lives loudly. They make their presence known from the very beginning. Others arrive quietly. They leave pieces of themselves behind without even realizing it. And before anyone notices, they have become impossible to forget. That realization came over this person like a wave. They realized that despite everything happening around them, despite the responsibilities, distractions, and challenges of daily life, there was still a place in their heart that belonged to thoughts of you. A place they could not erase. A place they had stopped trying to explain. The silence inside that car became heavier. Their eyes drifted toward the windshield, but they were not really looking at the road ahead. They were looking through memories. They were remembering times when they felt understood. Times when they felt seen. Times when simply thinking about you brought a feeling they could not easily describe. And then came the moment they could no longer hold everything inside. A single tear appeared. Not because of sadness alone. Not because of regret alone. But because they finally allowed themselves to feel everything they had been avoiding. They thought about how much had changed. They thought about how quickly time moves. They thought about all the words that were never spoken. Most importantly, they thought about you. For a few moments, nothing else mattered. The world outside continued moving. Cars passed by. Streetlights glowed in the distance. The night carried on exactly as it always had. Yet for them, time seemed frozen. And that was when something unexpected happened. They stopped asking themselves questions. Instead, they started speaking from the heart. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Honestly. The kind of honesty that only appears when nobody else is around. The kind of honesty that cannot be rehearsed. The kind of honesty that reveals what someone truly feels. And what they whispered surprised even them. They whispered that you had impacted their life more than they ever admitted. They whispered that certain memories still lived in their heart. They whispered that no matter how much time passed, some connections never completely disappear. For so long, they believed these feelings would fade. Last night proved otherwise. The truth they discovered was not about perfection. It was not about fantasy. It was not about having all the answers. It was about realizing that some people leave a mark on the soul simply by being themselves. As they sat there, they began understanding something they had resisted for a very long time. Your value was never based on what you could do for them. Your value was never based on how often you spoke. Your value was never based on circumstances. Your value came from who you are. And suddenly, everything looked different through that lens. The memories felt brighter. The emotions felt stronger. The truth felt impossible to ignore. They realized they had spent too much time focusing on distractions and not enough time appreciating what genuinely mattered to their heart. That realization carried a powerful emotional weight. Because once a person sees the truth, they cannot unsee it. Once a person acknowledges what their heart has been trying to say, silence becomes much more difficult. And last night, silence finally began losing its power. The whisper became a confession. Not a confession spoken to another person. A confession spoken to themselves. They admitted that thoughts of you had never truly left. They admitted that your presence in their story was far greater than they had allowed themselves to believe. They admitted that there was something special about the connection they felt whenever your name crossed their mind. And for the first time in a long time, they stopped running from those feelings. Instead, they sat with them. They listened to them. They accepted them. That acceptance brought tears, but it also brought clarity. Because clarity often arrives when everything else becomes quiet. And in that quiet moment, one truth rose above all others. The person they could not stop thinking about was you. The person connected to so many meaningful memories was you. The person who remained in their heart despite time, distance, confusion, and change was you. That realization changed the atmosphere of the entire night. What began as another ordinary evening became a turning point. A moment of reflection. A moment of honesty. A moment they may remember for a very long time. And this is only the beginning of the story. Because what happened after those whispered words revealed something even deeper than they expected. Something they had hidden from themselves for far too long. Something that would make them look at the future in a completely different way. And as that realization continued unfolding in the silence of the night, they discovered a truth that neither time nor distance had been able to erase. A strange realization was beginning to unfold, and this was the part of the night that changed everything. The tears had slowed, the silence had settled, and for the first time, your person stopped focusing on what was missing and started focusing on what had always been there. They sat back in their seat, took a long breath, and allowed their heart to speak without interruption. What happened next was something they never expected. As they stared into the darkness beyond the windshield, one memory after another began returning. Not because they forced those memories to come back, but because those moments carried a meaning they had overlooked for far too long. Suddenly, Conversations they once considered ordinary felt extraordinary. Little details they had forgotten became impossible to ignore. The way you made them feel understood. The way your energy lingered long after every interaction ended. The way your presence seemed to bring a sense of peace they could never fully explain. And then a powerful question entered their mind. What if I have been looking at this the wrong way all along? That question stayed with them. The more they thought about it, the more everything started making sense. For a very long time, they believed that time would erase these emotions. They thought new experiences would replace old feelings. They thought distance would make everything easier. Yet last night proved something completely different. Every attempt to move forward without acknowledging the truth had only pushed the truth deeper into their heart. That realization hit them harder than expected. Because the truth was simple. You mattered more than they admitted. You occupied more space in their thoughts than they realized. And your impact on their life was far greater than they ever allowed themselves to believe. The night became quieter. The emotions became clearer. And then they whispered something that surprised even them. They whispered that they missed the feeling of connection. Not just conversation. Not just attention. Connection. Something lasting. Something real. As they sat there reflecting, they began recognizing a pattern that had followed them for months. Every time they experienced a meaningful moment, they wished they could share it with you. Every time they achieved something important, they wondered what you would think. Every time they faced a challenge, your memory somehow appeared in their mind. At first, they dismissed it. And acceptance changed everything. The more honest they became with themselves, the more they understood why the emotions felt so overwhelming. It was not because of one single moment. It was because hundreds of moments had quietly built a story inside their heart. A story they never intended to write. A story they never planned to feel. Yet somehow, there it was. Waiting to be acknowledged. Waiting to be understood. Waiting to be accepted. The most surprising part was what happened next. Instead of feeling fear, they felt relief. Relief that they no longer had to pretend. Relief that they no longer had to ignore what their heart already knew. Relief that the truth had finally stepped into the light. For the first time in a very long time, they stopped fighting their feelings. And when they did, something beautiful happened. The confusion began disappearing. The doubts began fading. The noise inside their minds started becoming quiet. Because deep down, they already knew what their heart had been trying to tell them. You were never just another person in their story. You were one of the most meaningful chapters. That realization brought another wave of emotion. Not sadness. Not regret. Gratitude. Gratitude for every memory. Gratitude for every lesson. Gratitude for every moment that helped shape the connection they felt. And as they sat there beneath the night sky, they realized something they could no longer deny. Some people enter our lives and leave memories. Others enter our lives and leave transformation. You were part of the transformation. You changed the way they viewed certain things. You changed the way they understood connection. You changed the way they listened to their own heart. That is why your presence remained impossible to forget. The more they reflected, the clearer everything became. And then another unexpected thought appeared. What if this was not the end of the story? What if everything that happened was preparing them to finally understand something they were not ready to understand before? The moment that thought appeared, a new feeling emerged. Hope. Quiet hope. Gentle hope. The kind of hope that arrives when someone realizes the future may hold possibilities they never considered. That hope did not come from fantasy. It came from clarity. Because clarity reveals what confusion tries to hide. And clarity was finally winning. They looked up at the night sky and allowed themselves to imagine a future where they no longer ignored what mattered most. A future where honesty replaced uncertainty. A future where truth replaced hesitation. A future where they trusted their heart instead of questioning every feeling. For several minutes, they simply sat there with those thoughts. No distractions. No interruptions. Just honesty. And the more honest they became, the more one truth stood above everything else. You were still important to them. Not because of the past alone. Not because of memories alone. But because the connection still carried meaning. Because your presence still mattered. Because your influence on their heart remained real. That realization was impossible to ignore. And it explained why the emotions felt so powerful. Why the tears appeared. Why the whispers escaped. Why the silence felt so meaningful. Everything pointed toward the same truth. The truth they had been avoiding. The truth they finally accepted. The truth that changed the entire night. Yet what they discovered after this realization was even more surprising. Because as the clock continued moving forward and the darkness surrounded them, another thought entered their heart. A thought that carried a message. A message connected directly to you. A message they had never spoken aloud before. And the moment that message formed completely in their mind, everything shifted once again. What they wanted to say next revealed more about their heart than anything that came before. And that revelation would become the most unforgettable part of the entire night. As the night grew deeper, a new kind of honesty began to emerge. The road outside remained quiet, but inside that car, emotions were moving faster than ever. Your person had already accepted that you mattered. They had already admitted that your presence still lived in their heart. But now they were approaching a realization that felt even bigger. For a moment, they closed their eyes. Not to escape their thoughts. Not to avoid their feelings. But to listen to them. Because sometimes the loudest truth arrives in complete silence. And that was exactly what happened. The more they listened, the more one message kept returning. It appeared again and again. No matter how hard they tried to think about something else. No matter how many distractions they searched for. The same message remained. You were never forgotten. That realization carried enormous emotional weight. Because deep down, they had spent a long time pretending that certain feelings were temporary. They convinced themselves that memories would fade naturally. They believed emotions would eventually disappear on their own. Yet here they were, sitting alone in the middle of the night, realizing that some feelings had not disappeared at all. In fact, they had grown stronger. Not louder. Stronger. Stronger because time had tested them. Stronger because distance had challenged them. Stronger because every attempt to ignore them had failed. And suddenly they understood why. True feelings do not always demand attention. Sometimes they wait patiently. Sometimes they remain quiet. Sometimes they simply stay. And yours had stayed. That truth brought another wave of reflection. Your person started thinking about everything they admired about you. Not just the obvious things. Not just the moments everyone could see. They thought about the qualities that often go unnoticed. Your strength during difficult moments. Your kindness when nobody was watching. Your ability to keep moving forward even when life felt uncertain. Your ability to bring light into situations that felt heavy. These were the things they remembered. These were the things that stayed with them. These were the things that made you unforgettable. The more they reflected, the more emotional they became. Because they realized something important. They had spent too much time focusing on circumstances and not enough time appreciating what made you special. And once they recognized that mistake, they could not stop thinking about it. Every memory gained new meaning. Every moment gained new value. Every feeling gained new clarity. The night was no longer just a night. It had become a turning point. A moment of understanding. A moment of awakening. A moment where everything finally made sense. Then something happened that completely caught them off guard. A smile appeared through the tears. Not because they were suddenly happy, but because they finally understood something beautiful. You had changed their life in ways they never fully recognized. Even during periods of silence. Even during moments of distance. Even during times when they believed the connection was fading. Your impact remained. And that realization felt powerful. Because it reminded them that meaningful connections are not measured by constant presence. They are measured by lasting influence. You influenced the way they think. You influenced the way they feel. You influenced the way they understand the importance of genuine connection. That influence never disappeared. And now they could finally see it. As the minutes passed, they found themselves imagining conversations they wished they could have. Words they wished they had spoken sooner. Thoughts they wished they had shared. Feelings they wished they had expressed more honestly. Not because they wanted to change the past, but because they finally understood the value of truth. Truth creates clarity. Truth creates peace. Truth removes confusion. And the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. For a long time, they wondered why your memory continued appearing when they least expected it. Last night provided the answer. Your memory appeared because it still mattered. Your name appeared because it still carried meaning. Your presence appeared because your place in their heart remained real. That answer felt both simple and extraordinary. Simple because it had always been there. Extraordinary because they finally allowed themselves to see it. The stars above seemed brighter. The night felt calmer. Their heart felt lighter. Not because every question had been answered, but because the most important question finally had. Why do I still think about this person? The answer was clear. Because the connection mattered. Because the memories mattered. Because you mattered. And once that truth settled into their heart, a new feeling emerged. Confidence. Not confidence about knowing exactly what the future holds, but confidence about what they feel. Confidence about what is real. Confidence about what cannot be denied. For the first time in a very long time, they stopped questioning their emotions. Instead, they trusted them. That trust changed everything. It transformed uncertainty into understanding. It transformed confusion into clarity. It transformed hesitation into acceptance. And then another realization arrived. Perhaps the reason this night felt so important was because it marked the end of something. The end of pretending. The end of avoidance. The end of running from emotions that had already proven their strength. The end of denying what their heart already knew. That ending created space for a beginning. A beginning rooted in honesty. A beginning rooted in self-awareness. A beginning rooted in truth. And within that truth was a message connected directly to you. A message they had carried for longer than they realized. A message that had waited patiently beneath every memory, every thought, and every emotion. A message that now stood at the center of everything. As they sat quietly, looking into the darkness ahead, they repeated that message in their mind. Again. And again. And again. Each repetition made it stronger. Each repetition made it clearer. Each repetition made it impossible to ignore. The message was not complicated. It was not dramatic. It was not perfect. It was simply honest. And honesty has a power that nothing else can match. Because honest words come directly from the heart. And last night, their heart was finally speaking without fear. The whisper that followed carried more meaning than they realized. A whisper filled with gratitude. A whisper filled with appreciation. A whisper filled with recognition. Recognition of how much you truly meant to them. Recognition of how much your presence had shaped their journey. Recognition of how much value they saw in you. That whisper remained with them long after the tears faded. Long after the silence returned. Long after the night continued moving forward. Because some moments refused to disappear. Some realizations refused to be forgotten. And some truths arrive precisely when they are needed most. Yet even after all these discoveries, the most surprising realization of the entire night had not arrived yet. Because as the hours continued passing, your person was about to uncover something they had never fully understood before. Something connected to the future rather than the past. Something connected to possibility rather than memory. Something connected to a feeling they could no longer ignore. And when that final realization appeared, it would become the moment that changed everything they believed about this connection.